Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. There are some familiar faces, which is lovely to see. The important word for us is kosher. What does kosher mean? It means fit to eat. And listening to Hassan talking, there are so many things, particularly around food, that we have in common with Islam. So, kosher has actually gone into the language meaning it's legal, it's okay. Where do the laws come from? Because some of them might seem very logical to you. And if you ask our lovely rabbi, he'll say because it's written in the Torah. And most of the laws are in the book of Leviticus. So we have the same attitude to animals as the Muslim community have. So no pork, no ham, and the animals need to be slaughtered in the way that we think is both spiritual and holy and respecting the animals. So they're the main animals that we can't eat. We can eat chicken, turkey, goose, duck, any of the sort of farm animals that you see. There are difficulties sometimes around game, rabbit or deer, which has become fashionable again, because it's shot, it's not killed in the way that is according to our laws. Now for us, there is also around fish. Our fish have to have fins and scales. And so no shellfish, no eel, no oysters, none of those, because they live on the bottom of the surface of the sea. Now, it isn't because of that. It is because it says so in the Torah. And on top of that, we do not eat dairy and meat together. So, for example, no cheeseburgers. And an observant Jew, like our rabbi, would not go and eat in somewhere like McDonald's because the food is not kosher. And it doesn't just apply to the food, it applies to the crockery, the cutlery, the pots and pans. Pyrex can be used for either. So in observant families, you will find that they have two sets of food, of those kitchen items and dining items. And again, for observant Jews, for Passover, they will have a completely different set. And I'll come to that in a moment. And by doing this, there is an element of spirituality. Now, in order to kosher the meat, it's not just that you slaughter it in a way where they calm the animal. It's usually a rabbi who is trained to do it. You have to salt it to drain all the blood off. And sometimes, particularly in the olden days, that meat wasn't particularly good. And I think that's why a lot of Jewish women were very good cooks, because they had to try and make the best of what they had. And kosher salt is much, much rougher than normal salt. Now, let's have a look at some of the things that I've got on the table here. So, bread, challah, and I bought some, and I've also bought some bagels as well if you want to try them. This is actually for the Sabbath, but many families like mine eat them all week. You can see it's plattered to make it look different to how we would eat the bread during the week. And unlike normal bread, there is no milk in here, because if you had milk in it, you couldn't have a piece of bread to make a blessing over the meal if it was a meat meal. So they're made with oil. And part of the ritual of the Sabbath is also drinking wine, and I didn't bring any wine with me. So wine makes the day special, just as the challah makes the day special. The word challah means a portion. In the time of the Bible and the time of the temple, the women would bake communally, and they would take a piece off, and that would be an offering in the temple. So those, and it's not me, I have to tell you, I can't plait. Those, like our rabbi's wife, and a lot of my friends during lockdown started baking challah. You take that piece off, you don't cook it, and you dispose of it as a reminder of the time of the temple. Before we eat the challah, we put some salt on it. So ordinary things, like bread, like salt, become elevated during Shabbat, making it an extra special day. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention is the difficulty with gelatine, because it comes from the bones of cows and pigs and things. So we have our own version of things like jellies and cola sweets. So there's some on the table there for you to taste. These are kosher cola, and they go down very well in schools, I have to tell you. And what they use is seaweed, is agar. So our jellies are made of things like that. And a lot of our stuff is suitable for vegan and vegetarians. I'm going to mention a couple of festivals. On Sunday evening, this coming Sunday evening, it is the beginning of the Jewish year 5783. And our festivals always begin the night before, and it was evening and it was morning. So we get together in the home, but also in the synagogue, but the food is in the home. And the symbolic food at that time, and I'm sorry I haven't brought any, I was going to bring some, is honey cake. You give honey for a sweet new year. You have apple dipped in honey for a sweet new year. New beginnings. And I always find it fascinating that the school year begins in the autumn, around the time when we begin our festivals. It was difficult for me sometimes because it was the first day back at school. So that's what we have. And the other symbolic food that we have at that time, pomegranate. Pomegranates grow particularly in the Middle East, and you can see them growing on trees. And incidentally, they were the symbol on the bottom of the garments that the high priests wore in the temple. If you split a pomegranate, there are lots and lots of seeds. And the story goes that there are as many seeds in the pomegranate as there are rules in the Torah. Well, that's not quite true, because we've got 613 of them. But it's lovely symbolism around that time. The other important festival for us connected with food is Pesach, Passover, the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And traditionally, the Jewish people who were stuck as slaves in Egypt would make their bread the night before for the next day. But Moses got the go-ahead from Pharaoh to go. And so he said, well, you've got to have a meal and bake the bread. But of course, it hadn't risen, so it came out flat. Mind you, I have another theory. Because in the Middle East, people often carry things on their head, I reckon the sun baked it sometimes. So, ladies, it's our fault that we have spring cleaning, because the house has to be spring cleaned from top to bottom. Curtains, clothes, the car vacuumed, to get rid of what we call the chometz, which is the normal food that we would eat during the rest of the year. So there's a frantic bakering baking, but you cannot use leaven, you cannot use yeast, because the matzah, the bread, didn't rise. So you've got that kind of discipline for that time as well. And I've got something very interesting to show you. Our rabbi was in Ukraine, and these are hand-baked matzah. And I mean, yes, there is flour in them, there is wheat, but they're only allowed to be baked for 18 minutes. And these were baked in the Ukraine. So, it can't be easy at all for anybody there, but I thought it was good to share. And I've also brought with me a Passover cake. And again, it will not be normal flour, and I'm very, very happy for you to have a taste of it. They're very nice. So meringues, a lot of nuts, but you've got to be careful if you've got people with nut allergies for Passover. And that's only part of it. We have the Seder meal, and we have symbolic foods connected with the story. So whatever festival we've got, apart from Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which will happen 10 days after Rosh Hashanah, and there are other fasts. Food, each festival has its own food. My grandmother spoke very little English when she came from Germany, and she still never spoke very much English. My sister had to translate Mrs. Dale's diary, some of you will remember Mrs. Dale's diary, into German for her. But she was a fantastic cook. And her mantra was, sit, eat. And for many, it's getting together for food, for enjoyment, and for remembering him upstairs, because there is that connection. The blessing over the food at the beginning of the meal with bread, the blessing at the end of the meal, saying thank you to God for giving us food. So it's not just that we live to eat, it's part of who we are and what we do. Now, there are many, many other things that I could talk about, but Graham's told me I can only have 10 minutes. So perhaps if you want to ask me questions later on, I'll be happy to do that, but I hope I've given you a flavour of what Jewish food is all about. Thank you for listening.